Hi, my name is Colin Woolway. I'm a drummer, been a drummer for the best part of 50 years. I started when I was about 11, so you can work that out. I'd like to thank Laura Dannon for asking me, for even thinking of me, in fact, to contribute to her very nice DrumQuest YouTube channel. And at this point, I would urge you to subscribe if you haven't done already. It's very interesting. I had a look. Honestly, it makes a nice change, actually, to see drummers just kind of talking about things. There's a few questions. What's the first one? The first one, what makes a good drummer? Yes. Now, the thing, one thing to remember is that we're all musicians, so there's lots of ground rules for musicians. Practice, work hard, turn up on time. Drummers, I would say, turn up early. That would be a really good piece of advice. Turn up earlier than everyone else. But, you know, musically speaking, drummers occupy a very interesting position on the stage in that physically we are at the back of the stage surrounded by equipment, but in terms of musically, we're very much in charge of the situation. So I think drummers are a very interesting breed. And I think what makes a good drummer is, it's not, to start with, it's not your job to keep time. There are two obvious reasons for stating this. One is it's every musician's job to keep time. Why is it the drummer's job to keep time? It's everybody's job to keep time. And secondly, a bit of a you know, what happens if the drummer isn't required to play? What is he, sit at the back of the stage keeping time? No, it's not the drummer's job to keep time. It's the drummer's job to drive the band. It's the drummer's job to be in charge of the band. So what makes a good drummer, I think, is being able to be in charge whilst being responsible and also whilst being musically sympathetic and having empathy with what's going around. You know, you need to obviously be as musical as you can, and quite often, as drummers, we're told what to do. You need to be able to receive instructions, but at the end of the day, when the music starts, you're the driver. A weak drummer will not make the band have a good time. And I think it's been said quite often, and I would 100% agree, that if the drummer is having a bad night, then the band will have a bad night. If the drummer is weak, then the band don't sound as good. So my thing would be definitely that. You need to be a driver. You're in charge of the band. At the same time, it's not your band. I've been in this situation many times. But it's not my band. I'm a hired gun, or I'm just the drummer in the band. But when the music starts, the band are relying on you to push things along. And I think that's what makes a good drummer. I think my favorite examples of that, in probably the order that I discovered them, would be John Heisman. His drumming with Colosseum, that was his band. But his drumming with Colosseum was commanding, and yet you could tell he was listening to whatever was going on. Then Billy Cobham, same thing, when he left the Mahavishnu Orchestra and formed his own band, and I still watch Billy Cobham now, you know, 50 years later. He's still in command of that band, and yet he's still musically sympathetic. He doesn't overplay, he plays the way he plays, and yet he commands that band. And Simon Phillips, although he has his own band now, Protocol, and he's had for some time, it's the same deal when he was doing sessions. If you watch him, and you can, there's plenty of Simon Phillips on YouTube, watch him doing sessions. He's musically sympathetic, he understands what's going on around him, and yet he's totally in charge. To the extent that you maybe take it a little bit further, if Simon Phillips puts a fill in, it's because he's a million% sure that it needs to be there. No matter how complicated it is or how difficult it might be, he's absolutely certain that needs to go there. I think that's what makes a good drummer. Other questions, advice for beginners? Oh, listen. Oh, that's it, listen. Capital L, underlined, exclamation mark at the end. Listen. If you listen to advice, to other people, to music, other musicians, your teacher, just keep listening. I think that's probably all I'd say. Just listen. How's lockdown affected me? Well, actually, not too bad, and I'm very lucky because I now don't tour, and I do very few gigs these days. Through choice, I don't mind adding, but it goes back a long. It wasn't last year's decision. It goes back a long way. That decision, 20 years. That decision goes back, and it's got to the stage where I pretty much don't do any gigs, but I do a lot of clinics. I do a fair bit of travelling with the drums to do drum shows and stuff like that. Of course, all that's gone, but I rely on teaching for my living, and that's just all gone online. I teach at 2 academies. I teach at the Brit School and East London Arts and Music, and all those lessons went online. All the academy teaching went on. Most of my private students actually asked if we could carry on online. So I'd say I'm doing 80% of my lessons anyway. So it hasn't bothered me that much. But that personally, I mean, I know lots of musicians it's really affected badly. But I'm doing okay. I'm having breakfast, which makes a change. Finally, yes, shout out to Laura. Very interesting YouTube channel. Thank you for asking me. Any personal notes I'd add? It's one thing I say to my students who I don't think are stepping up to the plate in their lessons. If you want to be a successful drummer, and I don't mean necessarily a professional musician, if you want to be a professional drummer, this definitely is something you should be remembering. But if you just want to be good, if you don't practice, somebody else is. What I mean is, take your opportunities, practice as much as you can. If there's something you can't do, try and do it. Get a teacher to show you what it is. If you don't play jazz, practice some jazz. If you don't know your Latin, get to grips with your Latin, because there's somebody else doing it. Okay, so when you go out, and I say to my students who want to be professional musicians, when you go out into the world, if you don't know what a 7-stroke roll is, or an 11-stroke roll, or a paradiddle-diddle, if you don't know what a 3-2 mambo is, or the definition of clave cascara, if you can't play jazz in 3/4, there'll be plenty of drummers who can do that, and they'll get the work that you won't get. Okay, and a positive note: keep the faith, keep practicing, hang out with people, be nice to people all the time. You know, an average musician who's good to hang around and is pleasant will probably get more work than a great musician who nobody likes. Thanks again, Laura. I hope you enjoyed my little effort. See you all soon.